For those who grew up during the Cold War, this structure behind me might look just a little bit familiar. This is a section of the Berlin Wall. But today, I am not in Berlin. As a matter of fact, I'm in the middle of the country in Fulton, Missouri at Westminster College. Now, the Berlin Wall in the years during the Cold War really became a manifestation of what Winston Churchill called the Iron Curtain, which was like this symbolic division between the democratic nations of the West and the communist-controlled countries in the East. Now, that Iron Curtain phrase was probably the most well-known portions of Winston Churchill's speech called The Sinews of Peace. And that was given in 1946 right here on this very campus. So today, we're going to be going to the National Churchill Museum, and we're also going to be looking at the exact spot where Winston Churchill gave one of the most famous speeches of all time. Now, again, what we're looking at are 8 sections of the Berlin Wall, which came down in November of 1989 and was a symbolic end to the Cold War. And I believe that this monument was dedicated by Ronald Reagan in 1990. There's something that I want to show, though. So, really, whenever you look at any section of the Berlin Wall, and I've seen a few before, one thing that is common to all of them is on one side you'll see, this is the side that would have faced West Berlin, so you see, a lot of painting and graffiti and different things like that. But if you go and look on the other side, which would have faced East Berlin in the communist zone, nothing. As a matter of fact, you literally would have been shot if you would have approached this side of the wall. So over here, on the democratic side, you have freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And over here, well, not so much. So anytime you see a section of the Berlin Wall, what you're looking at is a monument to the failures of communism and Marxism. And at this particular monument, they have these human figures cut out. You can see some construction that's going on the other side. But these human figures represent people fleeing from the communist zone in the east to the free democratic zone in the west. Pretty cool. But anyway, we're going to go inside the Churchill Museum and see what we can learn. All right, well, we just walked in here to the National Churchill Museum. I've been here once before, but I think there's been some changes since I was here last, so yeah, we're going to dive in and see what we can learn. So the museum starts with looking at Churchill's early life, and they have these little toy soldiers here and talk about how Churchill, even at a young age, some kids like to play army. He was more into organizing them and getting them into formations. It's kind of a foreshadowing of his future. And here's something that I didn't know that I really found interesting. Here are Churchill's parents. So there's his father. What I didn't know is that his mother was an American. It's from Brooklyn. Yeah, kind of interesting. Now, there's no way that I'm going to be able to fully do justice to all of Churchill's life accomplishments, but traveled around a lot as a young man and served in the Boer War and was actually captured and escaped. So what you're looking at here is something from a sketchbook talking about Churchill's capture and escape in the Boer War. And a lot of this was just to kind of build up a reputation, and eventually he ended up coming back to Britain and getting elected to Parliament. So what we're looking at right here, something called a deed box. This was used by Churchill to carry important memos and papers and things like that during his years in Parliament. Interesting. Now, Winston Churchill is probably best known for his role as a leader in World War II, but he was also the First Lord of the Admiralty in World War I. Okay, so World War I, obviously you had this stalemate on the Western Front, and Churchill, in an effort to try and break that, wanted to try and open up a second front in the east, right in here, at a place called Gallipoli. Long story short, it ended up being a miserable failure. A lot of Australians and New Zealand troops were killed. It's recognized today by something called Anzac Day. And Churchill kind of got knocked down after that and ended up going to the trenches. Served there for a few years and then ended up going back to Parliament. So here we can see typical World War I outfit for a British soldier. And of course we have our rule that if we see a gun we have to film it. Well, there you go. It's a British rifle from World War I. We are now moving into the area of Churchill's life that, in my opinion, really defined him, and that was his role in World War II. And here you can see a quote from one of his famous speeches. He says that we will never give in, never surrender. Okay, you can kind of hear a video being played in the background, but this is showing some war souvenirs that were brought back by a soldier from World War II. A couple of Nazi Party flags, a couple of daggers, and my own personal favorite, the German Luger. All right, well, we just came through the World War II section here at the Churchill Museum. And to be honest, you need to come to this place for yourself and go through it. There's so much information. I really didn't do it justice. But really the big claim to fame here in Fulton is Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. We'll take a look at this. Right here is the original lectern and chair that Churchill used on the day that he gave arguably one of his most famous speeches. So you can see this is an original sign that was made up to welcome Churchill to Fulton. This was a huge deal for this little town. And then, yeah, right here is where one of the most poignant and influential speeches of all time was laid out. Wow. Now, since this speech was given at a college and it was kind of a formal academic setting, Churchill had brought along his academic gown. This is a replica of that robe. And then you also have the pitcher and water glass that he had at his side. And then right here, this is a copy of the letter that was sent to Churchill inviting him to come and speak. Now, he probably would have just politely declined had it not been for this handwritten note down at the bottom from Harry Truman. All right, so we've gone through the museum and looked at all kinds of different things from the life of Winston Churchill. But to me, the coolest display in this whole museum, this is just my opinion, is right here in this room, looking at all of the pages of Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. This is so cool to me. So what you're looking at right here is a carbon copy of Winston Churchill's speech that he gave here at Westminster College. And if you'll notice, a couple different things to notice here. So as Churchill was on the approach here to Fulton, he was revising and editing his speech, and his secretary was taking down notes in shorthand for him on different things to change. So if you look, you notice that everything is written kind of in prose. So it has a poetic rhythm to it. Wow, this is so cool to me. This flag right here is the British flag that was flown up on the stage, or not flown, but it was up on the stage whenever he gave his speech. Now right here is the page from really the most famous part of the speech, where he says, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, so on. You'll notice that when he gets to the part midway through this page, he says all the famous cities and populations around them originally it said lie in the Soviet sphere, but he tweaked it just a little bit to lie in what I call, or what I refer to as, the Soviet sphere. So he personalized it a little bit. Very, very cool.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere. And all are subject, in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow.
All right, we're making our way across campus now. And on the day that Churchill was here, him and Truman would have come through the small town of Fulton. And they would have entered the campus and come right up along this road in a convertible. Churchill had his cigar, they're waving to the crowd. It was a really big deal. And where they ended up stopping was at this house right here. This was the house of the president of the college. They had some ham, had some fried chicken, and took the opportunity to get a little bit of rest. And there would have been thousands of people crowded out here just outside of this building where Churchill was going to be giving his speech. All right, well, we just walked in. And if you didn't know what happened here, this would look like just a regular run-of-the-mill gymnasium. But this is the spot where Winston Churchill gave the Iron Curtain speech. Simply amazing to be here. Okay, now right up there, we're looking at the press box, where they would have had some cameras that was there originally in 1946, whenever Churchill gave his speech. And then if you watch the video, you can see that there's a curtain behind Churchill. Well, they still have the metal pole up there that held that curtain that was behind him. Now, if I walk over here, you can see that this is still an active gymnasium here at Westminster College today. And right here, just as soon as I step out of bounds, this is the exact spot where Churchill would have been standing to deliver his Iron Curtain speech, to deliver the message that even though World War II was over and the threat of Nazism had passed, that there was still a looming threat that was lingering in the East. This was going to set policy for the next 45 years in the Cold War. It's absolutely amazing to be here in this place and to be standing at the exact spot where one of the great men of history gave one of the greatest speeches. And it's all right here at Westminster College. It's right here along I-70. Anybody that is traveling through here, I would highly recommend stopping at this place. There is so much history that is packed right here in this one area that it makes it a must stop. All right, learned a lot today. Now we're off to the next place.